Tonight, Kamala Harris is in Atlanta, headlining a packed rally. It's the vice president's first visit to Georgia since becoming the de facto Democratic nominee, bringing that key battleground state back into play. Harris's place at the top of the ticket has swung momentum and enthusiasm back to the Democrats, particularly amongst young voters, who the campaign had hoped to woo with a performance by hip-hop star Megan Thee Stallion, Savage. Vice President Harris told the fired-up crowd that this campaign is a fight for the future.
Ours is a fight for the future and for freedom. And I don't have to tell folks in Atlanta that generations of Americans before us led the fight for freedom. And now, the baton is in our hands. Each and every one of us.
Tonight's rally is just the beginning of a rush of travel for the vice president. She plans to visit six battleground states over 4 days next week with her as of yet, unannounced running mate. As the New York Times points out, that schedule suggests that we should learn who Harris chooses as her vice president by next Tuesday at the latest. And the Times reports that there are 5 serious contenders remaining in the Veep stakes. Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Governors Josh Shapiro of Arizona, Tim Walz of Minnesota, and Andy Beshear of Kentucky, as well as Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Also today, the Harris campaign announced a big ad buy to the tune of $50 million ahead of the Democratic National Convention next month. The campaign just launched their first ad presenting the vice president as a, quote, fearless former prosecutor.
The one thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless. As a prosecutor, she put murderers and abusers behind bars. As California's Attorney General, she went after the big banks and won $20 billion for homeowners. And as vice president, she took on the big drug companies to cap the cost of insulin for seniors. Because Kamala Harris has always known who she represents.
That comes amid a dueling new ad from Donald Trump attacking Harris on immigration and the border. Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, are also following Harris to Atlanta on Saturday. In fact, to the exact same venue at Georgia State University where she spoke tonight, directly to her opponent.
Well, Donald, I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say, say it to my face.
Senator Raphael Warnock, Democrat of Georgia, met Vice President Harris at the Atlanta airport and joined her at the rally tonight. He joins us right now. Senator Raphael Warnock, thank you so much for joining us tonight on All In.
Thank you. So great to be here with you, Jason.
First off, I just want to say how impressed I am with the organization on the ground that you were able to get from the airport to the rally place with Atlanta traffic on 75 this time of day. I'm very impressed. I got to start off with that. I have been to many a rally in Atlanta. I was there the night that you defeated Herschel Walker in a runoff. I've seen the excitement of Abrams campaigns. I've seen the excitement of Ossoff campaigns. How does tonight's rally compare to other rallies you've been to politically in Georgia over the last 3 or 4 years?
Oh, tonight's rally is the top of the heap. The energy here, as you can see, is electric. The rally's actually over, and still there's a great deal of excitement. You can feel it on the ground. I was actually with the vice president. I came down from Washington, D.C. with her, and as we were riding through Atlanta, you could see people lined up on the streets. You could see them all standing on bridges waiting to greet her to battleground Georgia. We know from experience in Georgia that when we show up, we win, that the path that leads to the White House goes through Georgia, and I think the vice president felt that here tonight.
Now, we know that in 2020, Georgia was won legitimately by the Biden-Harris ticket with only about 11,000 voters, right? What's interesting is Metro Atlanta alone grows by 11,000 voters every 2 months. So what do you think is going to be different about campaigning this time in 2024 with only 98 days left than maybe just 4 years ago? Because it seems to me like the ground is going to be different and there are newer people for Harris to communicate with.
Well, you know, that is the work of the campaign. And the good news is that the Kamala Harris campaign is already on the ground. Of course, that began with the Biden campaign. That infrastructure is very much in place. I've been back to the state time and time again with the vice president. We were just here together about a month ago before she was the nominee. And that's because she is taking Georgia seriously. Look, as you point out, we won in 2020. The Biden-Harris campaign won. You had Donald Trump calling into our state asking for 11,000 or so votes. The good news is that Kamala Harris is on the ground time and time again trying to earn the vote of Georgians. And she's doing that not simply by showing up for campaigns, but showing up in the ways in which this administration has delivered for the people of Georgia time and time again. We passed the single largest tax cut for middle and working class families in American history. It's called the Expanded Child Tax Credit. We're going to try to present that again this week in the United States Senate. And the Republicans, for some reason, don't seem to want to play ball. They're more interested in providing tax cuts to their wealthy friends than they are to ordinary working class people. And so this is the contrast. Elections are about a choice. And the question is, do you want someone who's standing on the side of the wealthiest of the wealthy or on the side of ordinary people? Do you believe in a woman's right to choose? Or do you think politicians ought to make that choice? Do you want a criminal in the White House, or do you want someone who has spent her career prosecuting criminals and standing up for working families?
You know, you mentioned the opposition. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution writes that, you know, Trump and J.D. Vance are going to be campaigning together on Saturday in Metro Atlanta. And I'm guessing they're probably not going to have a similar crowd. What is going to be necessary for Harris to sort of explain, be it policy-wise or messaging-wise, to keep Georgia purple and or blue? Because we know that Trump is going to be supported by a very popular governor. Brian Kemp is going to support him there. Brian Kemp is going to have all of his voter suppression tactics at his fingertips to try to keep Donald Trump in control of that state. What's the Harris campaign got to do to combat that?
Listen, if I and my colleague Jon Ossoff, an African-American man and a Jewish man, can win in Georgia, Kamala Harris can win in Georgia. The contrast between these two campaigns could not be more stark. I mean, you literally have a criminal running against a prosecutor. But more importantly, I think when you look at the contrast between Project 2025, which wants to cut the civil service, that wants to get rid of programs like Head Start. I have to tell you, I'm an alum of Head Start. This is a program that invests in the early childhood and development of poor children, that makes sure that they are nurtured with reading and literacy. Without Head Start, I wouldn't be a United States Senator. It literally set the foundation for my life. And Project 2025 and J.D. Vance's of the world somehow think that child care and investing in early child care is somehow a problem for American families. I don't know who they're talking to. The contrast couldn't be more stark. If you really want people to go to work, then you ought to invest in the child care infrastructure. And this is just one of the things that you're going to see time and time again raised in this campaign. And I think as they hear from Kamala Harris, the better for us. And the more they hear from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, the better for us.
Senator Raphael Warnock, thank you so much for starting us off today. I know there's going to be a huge crowd there. It seems like people are still partying in the background. So good luck getting out of the rally tonight, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much.
You know, there are just 98 days left until Election Day. Early voting starts even sooner. And the momentum behind the Kamala Harris campaign, it shows no signs of letting up. Tonight, 10,000 Harris supporters packed into an arena in Atlanta, Georgia. The vice president was introduced by three-time Grammy winner and rap megastar Megan Thee Stallion. Vice President Harris used that moment to issue a direct challenge to Donald Trump.
The momentum in this race is shifting. And there are signs that Donald Trump is feeling it. He pulled out of the debate in September he had previously agreed to. Well, Donald, I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say, say it to my face.
Well, that rally comes as new battleground state polling shows that Kamala Harris has effectively wiped out Trump's lead in all of the key swing states. In Michigan, the latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll finds Harris leading Trump by 11 points. That is a major shift in that state. In all 6 other battleground states polled, Harris and Trump are in a statistical tie within the margin of error. Harris leads by 2 points in Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin. Trump leads Harris by 4 points in Pennsylvania and by 2 points in North Carolina. The candidates, they are running dead even in Georgia. As the vice president's campaign heats up, the Republican candidate and his running mate, well, they are spending their time running away from their own unpopular statements and policies. For weeks, Democrats have been hammering the Trump campaign over Project 2025, the extreme policy agenda created by a conservative think tank as a blueprint for a second Trump administration. Today, the Daily Beast was first to report that the Trump campaign has officially forced that conservative think tank to part ways with an architect of Project 2025. According to that report, Trump campaign manager Chris LaCivita put the screws to mastermind Paul Dans in an effort to force him out and shut down the right-wing shop behind Project 2025. Following that reporting, the Trump campaign released a statement trying to publicly distance itself from the project, saying, quote, reports of Project 2025's demise would be greatly welcome. But if Trump really wants to cut ties with Project 2025, well, he might have to start firing people a little closer to home. A new book from the architects of Project 2025 promoting their extreme agenda is set to be released later this year. And the foreword to that new Project 2025 book was written by none other than Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. Vance even promoted the book back when its original title was, get this, Dawn's Early Light, Burning Down Washington to Save America, with a cover image showing a match over the word Washington. The Trump campaign has already spent the past week in damage control mode over the choice for Trump's running mate. Vance, as you know, has tried to explain away bizarre and offensive statements he made denigrating adults who do not have children, referring to them derisively as childless cat ladies, even arguing that parents' votes should count for more than those of non-parents. Those comments appear to be more than just a one-off. Reporters have now unearthed even more video of J.D. Vance calling people without children deranged, psychotic, and sociopaths.
There's just these basic cadences of life that I think are really powerful and really, really valuable when you have kids in your life. And the fact that so many people, especially in America's leadership class, just don't have that in their lives, you know, I worry that it makes people more sociopathic and ultimately our whole country a little bit less less mentally stable. You go on Twitter and almost always the people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
We care about children because we're not sociopaths and we don't want to live in a society of sociopaths.
Joining me now, Democratic Senator from California, Alex Padilla. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. We will get to your fellow Senator J.D. Vance in just a second. But first, I want to talk about that new polling out today from Bloomberg News and Morning Consult. It shows Trump and Harris in competitive races across 7 swing states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That is a course, a stronger showing than we saw when that was a matchup between President Biden and former President Trump. I wonder what you think it is about Harris's candidacy that is really activating those voters.
Yeah, well, first of all, Lisa, good to be back with you. And the numbers are not surprising. I think the one thing that we didn't hear Kamala say is bring it on, because we know that Vice President Harris is bringing it to the campaign trail. And you see the numbers shifting. You see the excitement. I mean, you saw that crowd in Atlanta tonight. Well, more than 10,000 people at that rally. That felt like a mini convention already, while the Democratic convention is still a couple of weeks away. But I think the response to her entering the race, the quick consolidation of support amongst Democrats and what we're feeling on the ground, to me, it doesn't come as a surprise. I've known her leadership and the electric nature of her personality for many years from our days in California. You know, you don't get to be a successful DA in San Francisco, a successful attorney general in California, a U.S. senator for California, and then be picked by President Biden to be the vice president without the credibility, the experience, the credentials, and the ideas to move our country forward. That's what people are responding to. The race may be close today, but we're feeling increasingly positive about Democratic wins in November. We just have 98 days to continue to do the work.
Senator Padilla, there's new reporting. Harris planning to campaign with her running mate as early as next week. Your sense of the most important qualities she needs to be looking for as she vets those candidates?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. I mean, it's probably the most important and personal selection that she'll make in her career. Who will be her ultimate governing partner in the Harris administration in the next 4 years? And I think just as President Biden did with her, she's going to look first at somebody who is ready to step into the role of President of the United States if necessary. So there won't be a debate about qualifications or preparation. It'll be somebody that she feels comfortable with, will be a true governing partner, and a lot of great talent on the Democratic bench for her to choose from. I couldn't be more excited.
As you said, a lot of excitement that bears out in the polling that you and I were just talking about. It also bears out in the fundraising numbers we have seen since she announced her candidacy. And yet the campaign and Vice President Harris herself quick to remind us that she remains the underdog in this race. How do you see it?
Look, it's a mentality that we have to keep. And again, as someone who has been a first in so many steps in my career, first Latino president of the Los Angeles City Council, first Latino Secretary of State in California, first Latino represent California in the United States Senate. I know what she has gone through and has to fight to overcome to prove herself. Her election as DA in San Francisco, Attorney General in California, to become the first woman, African-American, Southeast Asian Vice President of the United States, and on the verge of making tremendous history for our country. That's a lot that you're working against, let alone the negativity, the hate from Trump and MAGA Republicans. It is not lost on us. Victory in November is not guaranteed. We know the stakes are high, but increasingly Democrats across the country and independents across the country are ready to put in the work to organize, fundraise, get out the vote, because we need to win this November.
Senator Padilla, I only have about a minute left, but I do want to get your take on your colleague J.D. Vance and the fact that Americans are continuing to learn about some of the comments he has made about childless people, specifically childless women. You surprised by any of it?
It's appalling. It is offensive. And as much as we've learned by now, I'm sure there's more coming from where that came from. But it's not shocking in the least bit, because we also know who Donald Trump is. And Donald Trump chose as his running mates nothing other than a yes man mini-me. And it's just a continued reflection of what we know Donald Trump is all about. He's not about governance. He's not about inclusivity. He's not about anything positive. He's about hate, bitterness, division. His only agenda, tax breaks for the wealthy, and extremist judges that are part of why we're in this position to begin with. Democracy is at stake. Democracy is on the ballot this November, and we're going to do what it takes to win.
I have asked you a lot about the odds, so thank you for refocusing us on the stakes. California Senator Alex Padilla, as always, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Alicia.
It's day 9 of the Harris campaign, and this is your first appearance on The Last Word since the ticket change. Are you surprised not only by how the transition has gone, but also by the enthusiasm for Kamala Harris for president?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Listen, I don't think we're surprised, but we're certainly encouraged by the groundswell of enthusiasm that we've seen from the Democratic base, from what was formerly the Biden-Harris coalition, now fully the Harris coalition, as we head into the final 98 days of this campaign. You saw it on day one when President Biden endorsed the vice president to take forward the mantle here and carry us forward over the course of the next 98 days. You've seen the entirety of the Democratic coalition come behind the vice president. You saw us raise $200 million in less than the first week of this campaign. You saw us put on 2,300 organizing events across all the battleground states in the first weekend of action of this campaign. And you saw it tonight in Atlanta, where you had 10,000 people show up for a rally where you heard the vice president not just respond to that enthusiasm, but lay out the fundamental, very clear choice that we now have in this election between the vice president, who's fighting for the American people, fighting for a future where everybody has the opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead, where we stand up for the fundamental rights and freedoms of this country, particularly the rights of women, and where we stand up for our democracy, and laying out the clear threat that Donald Trump continues to pose via his extreme and dangerous Project 2025 agenda. That is the fundamental choice in this election. That's what you heard the vice president lay out tonight in Atlanta. And it's what we are excited to continue to communicate as we move forward here, because yes, we have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, but we remain laser focused on the fact that this is going to be a very close and competitive presidential race, as all modern presidential races are now. And so we remain focused on the task at hand as we approach the final stretch here.
You know, Michael, Donald Trump is attempting to distance himself from Project 2025 today. Today, his campaign issued a statement on, quote, Project 2025's demise. Is this the end of Trump's Project 2025 problem?
No, absolutely not. I mean, listen, first of all, the problem for him is that they posted it on the internet, and the internet lives forever. So his dangerous extreme agenda is there for all the American people to go see. I encourage them to Google Project 2025. If they haven't read through all 900 pages yet, you should certainly take the time to do so and educate yourself and warn your friends and family about the threat that Donald Trump's extreme agenda poses. But he also picked in J.D. Vance, the poster boy for Project 2025, right? This is the scion of Silicon Valley billionaires who wants to ban abortion nationwide and will bend over backwards to allow Donald Trump to enact his extreme agenda on the American people, going even so far as breaking the law or ignoring the Constitution, doing what Mike Pence refused to do on January 6th. So I think the choice is very clear, and whether or not he's trying to distance himself from what is fully his agenda, the American people already know what the facts are, and they know what the choice is in this election.
Well, speaking of J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate, he told donors at a private event that running against Vice President Harris was, quote, a little bit of a political sucker punch because basically Vice President Harris is young and dynamic. Now, Donald Trump seems to be backing away from debating Vice President Harris. What do you make of that?
Yeah, listen, since the vice president launched her campaign on day one, Donald Trump started backpedaling from his own commitments, saying that he was originally going to accept the ABC debate. Now he's trying to duck and dodge. I think if he wants to continue to complain, if he wants to continue to spout off some of the extremist rhetoric that you were referencing earlier in the show, he should do what the vice president said tonight in Atlanta. He should come say it to her face on the debate stage on ABC's air. That's what the American people deserve to see. That's what this campaign is going to be focused on presenting, whether or not Donald Trump shows up, which is the clear choice. But fundamentally, the American people deserve to see that clear choice on the debate stage. So the vice president will be there on September 10th. The question for Donald Trump is, will he show up as well?
You know, the former Republican lieutenant governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, has endorsed Vice President Harris, and he was at today's rally in Atlanta. Greg Bluestein of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution said that that Duncan has become, quote, a de facto spokesman for the Never Trump GOP bloc backing Harris. What's the Harris campaign doing to reach out to Republicans who have turned on Trump?
Yeah, listen, this campaign, the vice president, are going to make it abundantly clear that if you care about the fundamental stakes of this democracy, if you want to make sure that we continue to live in a democracy. Donald Trump, as you were saying earlier, is talking about the fact that if he wins, we don't have to have any more elections. This is the same guy who's talking about a bloodbath if he loses, or ruling as a dictator on day one. If you fundamentally want America to remain a democracy, there's a home for you in the vice president's campaign. If you want to continue to move this country forward instead of pulling it backward, as Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are making it very clear that they intend to do if they're able to regain power, there's a home for you in the vice president's campaign. And so we are going to win this election by making sure that we reach out to all voters, right? So black voters, Latino voters, but increasingly as well, those voters who, since January 6th, since the Dobbs decision, understand the persistent threat of Donald Trump's extremism and the harm that it continues to inflict on the American people. So no matter who you are, no matter where you live, there's a place for you in Vice President Harris's campaign.
One more question for you, Michael. Should we read anything into Philadelphia being the first rally location that Vice President Harris will campaign with her vice presidential pick?
No, I would not do so. Listen, this campaign, the vice president and her running mate are going to hit the ground hard, hitting every single battleground state. Once she makes that determination, we'll be going to not just Pennsylvania, but to Georgia, to North Carolina, to Nevada, to Arizona, across the blue wall, making sure that we are communicating directly with the voters. They're going to decide the pathway to 270 electoral votes. We'll be doing that on the ground. We'll be doing it on the airwaves. As you just said, we just launched today our first ad, part of a $50 million ad campaign between now and the convention. And we're able to do that because of all of the people who have gone to KamalaHarris.com, chipped in, helped us raise that $200 million in the first week of this campaign. And so our goal, whether it's on the ground through the travel between the vice president and her running mate, the work that we're doing on the airwaves and on the internet, is to relentlessly communicate with the voters that are going to decide this election. And that's what we're doing tonight. It's what they'll do on the stump, and it's what we'll do for the next 98 days.
You have an updated fundraising number for us? Is it 200 and what?
I don't quite yet, but tomorrow is another monthly fundraising deadline. So I would encourage everybody, if they want that number to be as big as possible, to, again, go to KamalaHarris.com and chip in, and then we'll have an announcement to make then.
I was critical of the president back in 2015 and 2016, and he has looked at me as somebody who can contribute meaningfully to the future of the country, so he asked me to be his running mate. This is not a vengeful guy. The media lies about Donald Trump more than anybody I've ever seen in public life. He's a good grandfather. He's a good father. He likes the American people and loves this country, and this is why he's doing it.
Oh, where to begin? Where to begin? First of all, James David, Donald Trump has got to be rethinking his decision to bring you onto the ticket because, like, you're just weird, man. Just real talk. Second, not a vengeful guy. His unofficial 2016 campaign slogan was "Lock her up." And third, your evidence that he's not a vengeful guy is that he allegedly is a big family man. Well, about that. A new book today by one of Trump's nephews, Fred Trump III, the son of Trump's late brother, Fred Jr., provides an inside look into the Trump family and the actions of Donald himself that refute JD's claims, including when Donald Trump cut off the medical insurance for Fred's disabled newborn son. That happened after Fred and his sister Mary Trump, who you've no doubt seen on this network and this show, and who wrote her own tell-all book a few years ago, sued their Uncle Donald and their other uncles and aunts when they tried to steal Fred and Mary's inheritance following the death of their grandfather and Donald Trump's father, Fred Sr. Yep, sounds like quite the family guy, that Donald. Joining me now is Fred Trump III, author of All in the Family, The Trumps, and How We Got This Way. Fred, thank you so much for being here. Let me read a little excerpt from your book, and this is the part where Trump responds when it became public that he cut off the medical insurance for your son, for his disabled grandnephew. When the reporter asked if he thought he might be coming across as just a little cold-hearted given our son's medical condition, my uncle shot back, "I can't help that. It's cold when someone sues my father." Is this the way that your uncle always was with your family, or did it change when your son was born and when his parents died?
Donald has always had that streak in him of needing to win at all costs. And when Mary and I challenged him and my aunts and other Uncle Robert, he couldn't accept that. It would have been nice if he was just gracious and said, hey, you guys are going through something unimaginable. But he couldn't bring himself to do that. So it's too bad.
Yeah. I've got another excerpt here. This is after an Oval Office meeting with you and advocates for individuals with disabilities and their families. And this is what he said. This is a quote. Those people, Donald said, trailing off, the shape they're in, all the expenses, maybe those kinds of people should just die. I truly did not know what to say. He was talking about expenses. We were talking about human lives. And there's one more book excerpt, and this is even closer to home. Donald, this is from your book. Donald took a second as if he was thinking, and this was about your own son. And Donald took a second and as if he was thinking about the whole situation. I don't know, he finally said, letting out a sigh. He doesn't recognize you. Maybe you should just let him die, and moved down to Florida. That is as callous as it gets. That is as ugly as it gets. What was your relationship to him after that? And I don't even know, just express your thoughts on that if you could.
Well, I mean, it's hard to explain how someone could say that about any human being, least of all his grandnephew. The interesting part, Joy, is that Donald never met William. So he didn't know or understand the inspiration William has been to so many people. So heartless is certainly a way to describe it, but that unfortunately is what I think we're seeing Donald has morphed into over the years. Interesting to go back to the Oval Office story. We were in fact talking about better efficiencies in advocating for the complex disability community, meaning in efficiency, spending less and getting more for it. So that he brought up expenses was a little surprising to me.
Yeah. There is evidence that Donald Trump has a sort of revulsion toward disabled people. I mean, he didn't want to, be near Bob Dole, who had a disability from being a war hero. He made fun of and mocked a disabled reporter. Is that it? He just really is just disgusted by people who are disabled?
He does not have an affinity for folks that he deems to be lesser than him. And I think we're seeing that not just with disabled, any group of people that he feels below him. And as I've been saying, he will use people as pawns and then cast them aside when he gets the goal that he's trying to achieve.
Does that include black people? Because he's pretending he would like to appeal to the African-American community, but you report in your book that he is not unfamiliar with dropping the N-bomb and with the hard R.
Yeah, you're referring to a situation back when I was about 10 years old when somebody had slashed the roof of his Eldorado Cadillac. And I was there, and I heard him say the N-word twice. And what shocked me, other than the word, was the fact that he did not know who, in fact, slashed his roof. So he just assumed that it was somebody who was black.
You have announced that you are supporting Vice President Kamala Harris for president. Did you vote for your uncle when he ran in 2016 and 2020? And why are you supporting Vice President Harris now?
I did not vote for Donald. And the reason why is I believe in policy over politics. The policies of the Republican Party, or what they have turned into, is antithetical to what I believe. I am supporting Vice President Harris. I am going to vote for her. I will campaign for her if asked. Her policies are what I believe in. I think, and this is not hyperbole, this is freedom on the line. She will move freedoms forward, everything that we, up until recently, have cherished in this country. The policies of the Republican Party are going to drive us backwards, and that's a scary place to be. She also, and I am confident in this, will help lead the charge to advocate for people with complex disabilities.
She recently gave an interview with a disabled person, and the empathy that she just showed, her ability to listen, her ability to communicate with them. I just can't imagine Donald Trump doing that. I guess my final question to you is, do you believe that, a lot of people find your uncle distasteful, cruel, mean? You can throw a lot of, sort of adjectives around. Do you think he's dangerous?
I think some of his thoughts and actions are not physically dangerous. I think they are dangerous for this country and could do great harm to it.
And if he became president, do you believe he would leave office ever?
No. He would continue on. And as I've said, even if he loses this time, which he will never accept, he would run again in 2028.
He will keep trying. And do you think that's fear of going to prison? Or do you think it's just a quest for power, lust for power?
I don't have an answer for your first question. I just think it's he doesn't like to lose. He hates to lose. There's nothing worse to him than losing.
Fred Trump, I thank you so much for the insights that only you really could provide to us. So thank you. Much appreciated. Best of luck with the book.
All right, so some of the contenders to be Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate stumping hard for her campaign right now, and they're out and about doing their thing. New reporting from NBC News says that Vice President Harris and her yet-to-be-named running mate will hit the campaign trail next week on a battleground state tour, the latest indication that her VP selection process is nearing its end. In the past week, they have helped the campaign expand its footprint a little bit, hosting events across the country and sharpening the message around her candidacy, like Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro with his message of freedom, which was also the message of Harris's first ad, as well as Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and his message of just how weird Donald Trump is, really, and J.D. Vance and their MAGA allies, how that all plays out. It's a message that many Democrats have taken and run with. So let's get into that a little bit with our panel, Tim, Cornell, and Donnie. So, Tim, why do you think the weird framing message seems to have caught on? Is it because a lot of folks out there already think these folks are weird?
I think it's bottom up. I've been saying that they should do this for a while. It really worked. If you look back to the Arizona Senate race with Mark Kelly, who's another VP contender you didn't mention, against Blake Masters, who is really in the mold of J.D. Vance in a lot of ways, just both from a policy standpoint as one of these nationalist MAGA guys, but also as a pretty weird dude. That was something that showed up in that race a bunch, just this idea that Blake Masters felt very creepy, and it turned off voters, and he ended up doing worse than Kari Lake in that election for a sense of how poorly he did. So I think that there's a model for this working. I think that voters think about it. And in J.D. Vance's case, there's something about Trump. We all agree Trump's weird, and he puts on all the makeup and he sprays his hair, and this whole thing is weird, but it's kind of in this performer way, reality TV show host way. J.D. Vance's weirdness is in a much creepier way, in I care deeply about when women should bear their children type of way. And that sort of creepy authoritarian weirdness, I think, is really kind of splashing over onto Trump and making that hit a lot more potent than if it was just about Trump and the electrocuted sharks or whatever.
Donnie, how does the brand thing stick? The weird branding thing stick the way it's sticking. It is amazing how that has bubbled up and really is kind of framing this campaign in a way I don't think people thought it would.
I want to piggyback on Tim because I think it brings up a great point. Everything about Trump, his hair, the things he says, was kind of baked in. And it was kind of, I don't want to say part of his charm because I hate to use the word charm with him, but part of his weird appeal. I'm using that word weird. Vance took it to a different place. That cat lady comment is something that sticks. That's a weird, twisted, cruel thought that, he's not going to get past that. When you go after women who have either chosen not to have children or can't have children and say they're not part of us, you're over there. That goes into the cruel and weird and where do you even come up with that? That's just the thinking is so twisted. And I think the weird is a great word. I like it because it covers a lot of sins underneath. It does, doesn't it? It really does. And so I know Tim Walz has been hitting it a lot. I mean, you can show a mashup of showing 80 people saying weird. I don't think it's anything that's calculated. I think it just kind of comes out of people's
organic.
mouths. Yeah, and that's what makes it effective.
It really is an organic aspect. And I think that's one of the things, Cornell, about this campaign that is so rich is the organic nature of it and how this plays out, particularly now that you're moving into this space where she's going to make a vice presidential pick. They're going to be out campaigning together next week. I mean, I can ask the obvious question, who that will be. Who do you think that will be with her? But I also want to tag along to the point that Tim and Donnie are making, how that candidate can further that narrative, whether it's the weird aspect of the Trump-Vance campaign, how the voters are responding at this moment. It has a really interesting organic feel to it.
It does, and you know the best things. And I'm hey, look. Some of my best friends are consultants, and I'm a consultant. But the best things about campaigns usually don't come from the consultants, right? It usually comes from.
I've been trying to tell campaigns that for years, by the way, Cornell. Just
consultants make too much money. They don't want to hear that.
Too
They don't
much
want to
money.
hear that.
Right. We should cut back on consultants after they pay me. But it is. It's like it's from the young people. You know, it's the same thing as brat, and it's weird and all this other thing. So it's really organic, and it's something that the young people, that sticks to these young people who look. We've gotten all we're going to get out of Donald Trump as Darth Vader, right? We painted Donald Trump as Darth Vader, as dark, gloom and doom and evil for the last couple of years, and that has given us a certain percentage of the vote. But the weird thing, I think, opens up a whole different conversation with the younger voters who don't see him as Darth Vader. Look, I will lean to Donnie on this because I think the Clinton Gore team was one that I thought was sort of a signaling something different, a youthfulness. It was signaling a value and a move forward. I hate this idea that they're doing all this electoral politicking about which state puts in play. I'd much rather them think thematically about what it is they want to sort of put forward. The way I thought, you know, tip to the hat to you that I thought that Clinton Gore put forward.
Hey, so Tim, you're the comms guy in this group. So you bring together the combination of strategy of Cornell, branding and messaging from Donnie. As a comms guy, looking at the VP rollout, looking at the momentum and all the things we've been talking about. What's your take? I mean, she's got some very effective communicators out there right now and around her, and the governors and so forth. How do you see all of this kind of coming together as she names her VP nominee and roll into that convention?
Yeah, look, I agree with Cornell. I think the brand thing is important and just kind of sending a message that this is a future ticket. So I think that if you get that as a baseline, then you get into the communication side of this and how you can kind of advance this message further. And in 2024 in particular, the one big thing that's different from the 92 race, no offense, Donnie, is that there's just all these other places where you can talk to people. You know, people you want, and voters expect to hear from you on TikTok. They expect to hear these little clips of interviews and to have somebody that is a deft communicator, you know, that can advance a message that lands with people. That's different than a campaign that's really about the nightly news and TV ads, you know. And so having someone who's a skilled communicator, I think, is really even more important than ever right now. And I just look at the options. I loved how Josh Shapiro has been talking. He's tickling my heart as a former Republican, talking about American exceptionalism, talking about how Donald Trump's been bleat talking America, down talking America. I love that hit. I think he's very deft. Tim Walz, we've been talking about, kind of has more of a Midwestern sensibility. It's like the guy that might fix your carburetor and talks like a normal public school teacher. I like that. Pete, I don't think we can forget Pete. Look, Pete was on Fox this weekend advancing a message very successfully. Yeah. So I would look at those three jump out at me as being particularly strong communicators. And I'd want to get them everywhere next week, you know, to trickle down to people's feeds.